And good morning, guys. Today's topic, if you happen to be joining, if you happen to be with us online, is all about finding your voice. This is important because this is about your distinction as a practitioner. So, what are you going to do? What needs to happen? What traits and characteristics do you need to adopt in order to prosper and continue to grow in this agile practice of ours? So, I want to welcome my very special guest, good friend of mine, Lawrence Bonnema from the Netherlands. How are you today, Lawrence?
I'm good. Thank you, Chris.
It's great to see you. Welcome everybody from Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you happen to be watching from. It's great to see you. So I wanted to comment on a couple of things before we start the conversation in earnest, and that's the state of our industry. We've been talking on and off, and I've been having this conversation a lot with people about who's buying Agile right now. So who is paying for Scrum Masters and coaches? Who's generating opportunities in the industry? It's mostly large-scale organizations. And I'll be quick about this. That means banks, insurance companies, government, other large retailers, and so on. Organizations that are, more like 5, 10, 20,000 people. And the problem that I have with that is that if you're an agile practitioner, you're spending most of your time focusing on the people problems and or the problems of scale rather than the business problems that agile is designed to help solve with speed. I'm going to repeat that. If you're working for a large scale organization, you spend most of your time struggling with the people problems, the scaling problems, rather than the business problems.
Yeah.
Because agile, go ahead. Say again.
Plus, you're like the lone gunslinger of truth in this case, because you'll also be telling everybody you need to descale in an organization that, in and of its nature, is large, right? So
Exactly.
everything is scaled.
Right. And so the problem that creates is there's a lot of frustration and there's a feeling of surrender when I speak to people who are trying to do this in big organizations. I talk to my friends who are still in the banks. I talk to my friends, and one of my clients is a big consulting firm, but I don't work on agile at scale. I work on solving tactical business problems right now. The things that can change profitability, the things that can change team happiness, the things that can keep teams from backsliding into 2-year programs for things that should take a couple of months to solve. And I love that challenge. It's a lot of fun, but I don't focus on scaling. What's happening is that people are getting frustrated and they're saying, I think maybe I'll go train, or I'll go write an agile book, or I'll go do something different, which is fine. But what's happening in our industry is that there's less and less demand. So another thing you'll see is the people who are dictating agile as a practice, the people who are hiring, are starting to collapse the coaching and Scrum Master role. If you notice, read the job descriptions, that the Scrum Master is the inspirer, the Scrum Master is doing individual coaching, the Scrum Master is asserting best practices or lessons learned or helping create centers of excellence. Those used to be coaching/transformation lead roles, and now they're trying to collapse them down to the cheaper role, right, of the Scrum Master, the one where it's assumed there's less seniority, so they can get away with charging a lower rate. They can get away with accepting a lower rate. So the rates are going down and the opportunities are not coming up. If you're collapsing coaches and Scrum Masters, you're basically taking every 2 positions and truncating them into one. So the rates are going down. The competition for individual positions is going up, and we're devaluing the practice a little bit. So that means as a Scrum Master or coach, you have to focus on the things you need to do to stand out. And that's what this episode is about. Finding your voice. My career has been about the intersection of things that other people were talking about. So I came up just like you. I was either in the coding room or the project management shoes. And we were always put down. I distinctly remember working at a place, one of the banks in Toronto, where we were in the basement of this gigantic building, like in Toronto, it's one of our largest buildings. 50, 60 floors, I can't remember. So we're working in the basement, and all of a sudden, someone would come down with a big suit and a tie and say, you know about this agile thing, go make it work. Go bring it upstairs, and we want things better, faster, cheaper, and all that other stuff. And it was a great challenge, but none of us had been trained on how to lead, how to speak to power, how to make mindset shifts happen in a big organization with clearly defined hierarchical power structures. So it was for me to intersect what I learned spending the past 8 years with ex-Navy SEALs, having been a boxing instructor, having had a career, in music and in other places, have been an executive for consulting firms, to intersect everything I'd learned and put it into what Agile really requires. If you listen to my show, it starts off with lots of people tell you what to do to be Agile. We want to focus on who you need to be. So that was my unique voice. And that's been the snowplow that clears the way for me to do the things I really want and to sustain a career. So I'm going to stop there and introduce once again my guest, Lawrence Bonnema from the Netherlands. Please tell us, Lawrence, what are your thoughts on all this stuff?
Well, the first thing crap, I'm in the crosshairs now because yes, I'm training. Yes, I'm writing a book, and I do work in Agile Scale. And I kind of like it there as well. So this is going to be interesting. What I do recognize, and I recognize with some pain in my heart as well, is the collapsing down that you were mentioning. Even though it should have been, and it's intended to be, but we're miserably failing at making it so, expanding up, right? Because the whole Scrum Master role is intended to include all those things. So that is okay. But it's not intended to include all those things to make it a cheaper rate, because it's the lower role. The Scrum Master is actually intended to be an Agile coach, and a really good Scrum Master does more than Scrum, does exactly what you just mentioned. However, I do recognize that that's not the industry standard at the moment, and I think that is one of the things that is wrong. I've, of course, been fighting somewhat at the sidelines, but try to be in the melee of things as often as I can, screaming, this was what Scrum Mastery was intended to be. But we're not succeeding there. So it needs to be, we need to change the tactics, or at least make sure that people recognize that, well, you can scream all you want. This is how it's designed. This is what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
But if nobody's listening, you need to do something else. And I've been looking for that something else for, well, ages. Some of that is indeed to be found in your podcast.
Right.
But, well, if that had all the answers, you would have even more listeners. So I'm thinking there's something to discuss there.
There is. What I'm mostly concerned about is that the current trend and the way things are going, you mentioned it, I'm just going to extract one piece of what you said, which is that we're not getting the success that we wanted. And if we don't get success with these big buyers like banks, because we're put in difficult, impossible, or situations that Scrum Masters just aren't trained to handle, which is the scaling problem, the people problems, the things that fundamentally make a bank-sized transformation hard. If we're not trained to do those things and we're not succeeding, we're going to get a bad reputation. We as practitioners are eventually going to throw our hands up and say, I don't see how this works. I don't see how this adds value. And people are going to start agreeing to us. And when you read the annual State of Agile report that comes out every, I think it's April or May, you're going to keep seeing rate of Agile failure creeping up 50%, 60%, gets a little bit higher every year, which is not what you want. The whole idea was, the old Standish reports, remember those, where 80% of the features that we build never get used, and 60, 70, 80% of projects, IT projects, are considered failures. If we start getting the same metrics, then what have we done? It's a great question. So it's important to be able to create your distinction so that your voice can be heard. It's important to start shifting the market in ways so that Agile can be effective. You as a practitioner can actually deliver results that are interesting to your customers. Banks, insurance companies, government, doesn't matter. So that's what we're focusing on. By the way, the idea of finding your voice is going to be an hour-long course in the Agile Mastery series in May. So keep watching my channel. I'll be announcing it early this week. That's a subscription-based series for something like $85 a month. You get 4 training experiences over the month, and then we do it again next month, and you have full access to the recording. So if you like this topic of finding your voice, it's on the menu along with my favorite one, which is how do you create prosperity in your Agile practice. So if you're thinking of going it alone, you're thinking of becoming a contractor, running an Agile business, I want to share with you some of the lessons that I've learned building my practice. So don't miss that one. Anyway, what are some of the fundamentals, Lawrence, to finding your voice, to creating something that makes people go, huh? What? Oh,
well, I have one thing I'd like to mention before we get there, Chris, because you mentioned the Standish report.
Having your own shirt helps.
Yeah, I'll put mine on next time. Do I have one? I think I have one somewhere. Anyway, um, you mentioned the Standish report, and at some point, my good friend Olaf Maassen and I we looked at that Standish report when he was still working at for the company that publishes the yearly review, and we crunched the numbers. And what was interesting there is that if you look at the Standish report numbers and you look at them closely, the true differentiator is not the framework that you're using. The true differentiator, honestly, if you correct for the size of the project, then the approach, waterfall or agile, doesn't matter with regard to success rates. That means, this is horrible as an agile coach, of course, because I was an agile coach at the time, and I just looking at the numbers, my whole job did not make sense because the true differentiator is size, not methodology or framework. And that means that you should make sure that whatever it is that you're doing, it is smaller than you thought it needed to be. So that's the true challenge. Now, of course, Agile, this is how I saved my job at the time, is a really good project grinder to make things smaller. But that only works if you put that first, right? So the whole concept of scaling is try to descale first. Because if you can't, it's going to be a world of hurt. Because big projects fail. Doesn't really matter if you do them agile or waterfall.
Got it. So this is what I was mentioning before, is that the failure doesn't come from agility. It doesn't come from the organization. It comes from trying to put agile in places where it doesn't belong. Right. So the failure occurs because you spend all your time dealing with people problems. That's resistance. That's lack of executive support, which, by the way, I translate to lack of executive education. Executives don't sit around reading agile books like we do. They don't spend all their time in the forums on GitHub or all the places or Reddit where we learn stuff and we're trying to grow the practice. They just want to know, it's like, I heard this agile thing's the best way to do stuff. Let's do it. Show me some things that I can understand to help make decisions. Tell me where you need my help. That's not disengagement. That's, one of the big problems we have is we've never lived the life of a CEO. So we have no idea what it's like to be presented with that many rapidly changing, multivariate decisions on a daily basis.
Now, Chris, you do have a lot of conversation with CEOs. So
I do, of course.
Exactly. I know, but what's the difference? Well, let's not focus on the difference. What is the best way to tell a CEO, explain a CEO, teach a CEO what the value of true agility is? Because I think that is something that we need to change in the industry. A lot of people aren't really able to do that in the right language.
So the problem with agility, when you put it into the hands of a large organization, is they see it as a process to change or improve delivery mechanisms. So the words process and delivery mechanisms can be problematic because people just see it as, again, an industrial age. Here's how to run the stamper. Don't stick your foot in the stamper. Don't stick your hand in the stamper. Don't lick the stamper because something will go terribly wrong. So put your feet here, put your hands here, press go, repeat. People don't need that. We're knowledge workers. We don't need that. We don't need industrial age instructions anymore. So the way I like to explain it to CEOs is like, what hurts? If there's one problem you could solve tomorrow, what would it be? Because this is how disruptors think. And the chances are good you, Mr. and Mrs. Bank, want to behave like a disruptor. You would at least like to get disruptor results. But in order to do that, you're going to have to behave like a disruptor. So find pockets of pain or pockets of profit where you want to do better. Let me show you how to get different results better. Let's learn how to assemble powerful teams. Let's learn how to bring people up so that they work and think in this fashion, which is going to mean undoing a lot of traditional thinking. So I like to use the Apollo 13 moment from the movie Apollo 13. Ever see the scene where they got to fit a square filter into a round filter hole or everyone dies? Huge problem, high stakes, small team of dedicated professionals, cross-functional, everyone with the experience that they need to solve the problem is in the room. They shut the door and they start building. Now, you don't want to have that kind of anxiety or pressure around everything you do in an organization or it will implode, but it's that kind of mindset that a bunch of smart, dedicated people with a great reason for doing what they do will produce the right results automatically. Process will take care of itself.
Yeah. So when you know where the pain is, essentially, the first thing to do is check how have you try to tackle it?
Yep.
What have you done so far? Right. And when the answer is not, I've tried to solve it with one, maybe two, possibly three teams. Yeah. But they say, well, I have my whole department working on it. So have you tried it with one team? Or let's try it with one team. Because usually that is the thing nobody ever thinks about, unless it is really a shit hitting the fan moment, right? So because then for a very interesting reason, I haven't really figured out why that then becomes so logical. When when it really hits the fan, you get one team.
Yep.
You get the best people in the room. You do exactly what the Apollo 13 movie said, like you just said.
Right.
And that then becomes the norm. So why isn't that the norm for everything we do? Have you tried using it with one team, doing it with one team, fixing this with one team? Do you really need more than one? If you really need more than one, then by all means go scale. However, have you tried it with one first? That I think is one of the messages we should be pushing.
Exactly. And then, of course, how to assemble that team and how to scale is a topic beyond this particular broadcast. What we wanted to talk about today was finding your voice. So if you're thinking of building your own practice, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, if you're thinking about writing a book about agility, it's essential that you do something that's different than what everyone else is saying. Last time we got together, I think we talked about running from popular opinion, maybe, or at least I podcasted on it, or I did a clubhouse on it as well. The notion that we have to stop saying what everybody else is saying, and we have to stop focusing on the lowest common denominator tactics, which is, how many people should I have in a stand-up? Those kinds of questions, have already been answered or solved. There's abundant resources on it all over the place. And it's argued that the best way to find the answers to those problems is to do and figure out what works for you. That's classic wisdom, right? The best way to approach life and leadership is not to read books and memorize rules and then try to exercise them, but rather to sit with your team, watch, experiment, try, learn, measure, repeat. So all of that stuff being out of the way, the memes and the quotes and the this, that, and the other, I think the most important thing we all need to focus on as practitioners is evolving the practice. And that requires that we find our own unique voice. What's your experience with that been, Lawrence? You mentioned you're writing a book. You're out there teaching the kids every day. You're raising up the next generation of leaders. So what are you teaching them? What are you showing them?
Well, to be completely honest, I'm teaching them pretty much standard fare. I give my own voice to the standard fare, but I'm teaching Scrum classes and teaching safe classes. So there's something I need to be mindful of, especially hearing this conversation and being part of it. I do like to fashion myself as a unique voice. I'm very aware, though, of the fact that it's very hard in this space to be completely unique, right? To totally distinguish yourself from the pack. And I think in the end, you'll need to find something that just rings true to you, focus on it, and try to ignore the rest of the world for a while you experiment with that with your teams. Just make sure to actually drink your own champagne, right? So really, really work at it and have your best practices or your great practices being developed, experimented with before you try to copy them from books. Even though they're inspiring, it's good to experiment with them. But I do recognize the fact that it's hard because I've read all the books. I've tried all the things. I've failed miserably at stuff that turned out to work 3 weeks later because something small was different. So I have my share, I think, of prejudices as well and pet peeves that come from probably my Cohn book at some point because I used to love everything he wrote. And that is, well, dangerous. Not that he's a bad consultant. I mean, I think he's pretty awesome still. But
he is.
Nevertheless, just copying whatever somebody else is doing is just not good because it is all about inspect and adapt and experimentation, all that stuff. We teach that. At least I teach that in my classes. But I don't always live that myself, if I'm honest.
Interesting.
And that I think is something I really need to make sure I do to find a real true voice.
Let me throw down some tips. First of all, I want to welcome everybody on Instagram. If you're watching, we're kind of two cameras here to try and get this everywhere. But Marianne is here if she's still online. Good to see you, Marianne. And thanks to everybody else on Instagram who's joining. The topic today is finding your voice. This will be one of the courses that I happen to do in May for the Agile Mastery Series. So stay tuned for an announcement on that. But let me give you a summary of the tips that I've used for finding your own voice. Distinction is important. If you are selling what everyone else is selling, take note of this, guys. This is so important. If you're selling what everyone else is selling and doing it the same way everyone else is doing it, it's like, we've all worked in office buildings where they have the elevator bank at the ground floor, and the first one that goes ding going up, everyone tries to push through that one. And then you're sitting there stopping at every floor, smelling everybody else, right? And making your way up floor by floor. Or you could wait 10 seconds for the next one that's got nobody in it, and you get straight to the top. That's the best metaphor that I can think of. When you have something distinct in your voice. So how do you find it? Every day, sit down and write. Don't let the pen up. 10 ideas or 10 things where you believe the opposite of what the industry believes. And you believe it because you've done it and you know it works. And everywhere you go, you preach, you testify, and it's a little scary. Because when you get out there and say, for example, I think one of the best things we can do for Scrum going forward in the future is remove most of the roles and ceremonies. I think when you're solving real business problems, half of those things don't matter. And in the future, where I see the future of Scrum going is non-technical. So we've done it, we've mastered it. DevOps is still important. Those things are all still important. But I think if you want to have a distinction in 2021 going forward, learn how to talk to HR departments, sales departments, marketing departments, real estate people, restaurants. Learn how to teach them about the industry that you've done that you believe that's different than what everyone else is talking about. You have never heard anyone really say it and really push hard. And probably it's because it's hard to say. Because in a bank, people will slap your wrists and say, nope, that's not in the permitted words list. But dude, if you listen to this podcast, you shouldn't be asking for permission in the first place. All right.
For
Nobody.
me, as a quick example of that, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I mean, as a quick example there, I like to preach that team size, the double-digit team size thing, it's just a number. Experiment with having larger teams, really, because more often than not, we think we need smaller teams because it says so in the Scrum Guide. At least at some point in time, it said so in the Scrum Guide, and it's not in there anymore for a reason. Because as it so happens, the real differentiator is how dependent are those teams? How autonomous can they operate? And if you can work pretty much autonomously with a 16-person team or even with a 25-person team, and they are really rocking it. The only thing that they're doing wrong is that officially their team size is too big. And maybe they have some micro sub-teaming going on there just to make it extra horrible. If it works, really, if it works, why fix it? And I've done that with SAP teams, which is another thing that people told me I couldn't do. Is that SAP? No, SAP is impossible to work that in an agile way. And I've just heard for somebody who returned there and to that very client that I started my agile career with like 15 years ago or something, they're still doing that and they're still rocking it. And they're actually really being agile on a full SAP stack, which people told us couldn't be done. And that are nice examples of exactly the thing that you're mentioning here, Chris.
Awesome.
So, yes.
So get brainstorming. Every day, write down 10 things that you believe that nobody else believes that are hard to say. And then, of course, finding the courage to actually say them is the important next step. And we'll talk about courage maybe in a future episode. But just get started by thinking about what can I say that's different than everyone else, rather than what can I say that's already bouncing around the echo chamber. Because again, it's like going through into that same crowded elevator with everyone else. Invent your own forum, invent your own practice. That's what the Forge is. How much time do we spend talking about Scrum Agile in the Forge? And the rest of the time we talk about how to be the most certain person in the room, how to be confident, how to be still, how to leverage your creativity, how to speak to power, how to not ask for permission, right? How to not care what other people think. That's half of what people are dying to learn. If people really wanted me to teach them how to use the talking stick in a stand-up, great. That's what they want to pay for. That's what I'll teach you. It's not what they want. When they come to the Forge, they come because they want to learn how to be badass, how to speak your truth. And that matters, right? If you want to proceed and succeed, that skill set matters. So we'll do more on courage in the future. But for today, write those, get in the practice of writing down things that the 10 things that you believe we should be talking about that we're not. It's especially exciting and tingly to me if it's opposite of what the industry's saying, because you're on to something. That's how all innovation happens. Tesla doesn't sit around figuring out how to make a better gasoline motor. You figure out how to do it all with an electric motor, how to make great battery cells. So that's where innovation comes from. And then I would say the other thing, what else? What else? What else? Start refining. Once a week, go through those 10 brainstorm ideas and start grooming them, because the ones that keep coming up are worth paying attention to. And especially if they're terrifying, right? If they make you sweat a little, you get that tingly, is that a heart attack kind of feeling? You're on to something juicy. And that's where I want you to focus. Bonus points if you're intersecting two things that have never been intersected before. Okay, so if you're a cyclist and if you want to explain agile using cycling metaphors, and that helps more people get it, do that, because that's what I did. That's how I built the podcast, the Forge, the following, the business. It all came from that daily practice. 10 ideas. All right. So don't forget to check out, let's see here. Don't forget to check out the May Agile Mastery series. We'll be discussing this and how to build a powerful Agile practice. You can find us on @BadassAgile on Instagram. If you haven't signed up yet for the Listener Lounge on Facebook, do so. And of course, good old fashioned badassagile.com. Lawrence, thank you so much for joining me today. It's always great to see you. Great to have you on the show. Instagram
Awesome.
Live people, hello. And we'll be doing some more of these. I think Wednesday around 11 a.m. EST. Might be a sweet spot for us. So if you want some more, stay tuned around Wednesday just before lunchtime. Tell your boss you're off to an important meeting. Go hang out in the bathroom with some headphones.
Good.
And I'll try it, see if it works. All right, guys. Lawrence, great to see you. Guys, we'll catch you next time.